Hawaii. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. How you guys doing today? Thanks for taking the time to be here once again. Appreciate you guys doing that. We're gonna continue today. We're gonna try to see what we can pull out of this book we've been reading. We've pulled out a lot of good drop. We had to dodge the hijack here and there, but in general, we kind of overstand based on our knowledge, our previous research, how to discern the info and pull out the babies, right? So let's go right into it. We're going to go into a new chapter, review this book for educational purposes, critique, commentary under fair use. So I hope you guys enjoy it. So here we go. Let's see what we can find. And if you haven't checked out the previous videos or readings or reviews of this book, we have the playlist by the same name of this book, which is America, the background of Columbus, being a survey of the revelations of science with respect to the Western Hemisphere and its peoples before its unveiling by Columbus, all right, by Jennings C. Wise, okay, about 1945 when they made this book. So again, the playlist, if you missed the previous episode, America, the background of Columbus being a survey of the revelations of science in the Western Hemisphere, something like that. So you could just go ahead and find it. We're going to go again to a specific chapter today, continue where we left off. We are in chapter 6 today. As you guys can see, it says here, the Deluge, the Olympii or Olympii, the Etruska and the cross man of Gallia, God's house and Postdiluvian America. Pretty interesting title. Let's see what they're talking about, right? When the polar ice caps came into being, inevitably, the old equilibrium of the terrestrial sphere was disturbed. Terrestrial sphere, huh? That's the hijack with the spinning balls, don't think that. With the wobbling of the planet on its axis, you see? You gotta be ready. That's the hijack. The waters rush back and forth, sundering the North Atlantic continent and leaving the present North America, Europe, Greenland, Iceland, the Faroe and Shetland Islands, Ireland, the Azores, and Canaries as remnants. You guys hear that? North America is a remnant of this old continent, huh? Still, however, which was connected to the British Isles. Still, however, Great Britain remained a while attached to that part of America. Great Britain was attached for a while to that part of America, known in Roman times as Armorica, and now called Brittany. Come on now, guys. See where they get in that word, Armorica? At the same time, the separation of Africa from Brazil was completed, and the Mediterranean was submerged. Those who escaped, like the mythical Deucalion and Pyrrha, into the northern part of the former Libya, now called Gallia, and to the present Libya, furnished the ancestors of the so-called Mediterranean peoples, who mingled their blood with the Boreans to form the Ligurians, Gauls, and the Basci. All right, very, very interesting. The Basque, Gauls, very ancient people of Europe. Again, of this relation to Atlanteans and Ligurians, the original Latins. Their legends, all these people coming from so-called Atlantis, and this book is saying, yeah, when that great continent kind of split up, that included the Americas and British Isles, then these people became the remnants, they're saying, right? So-called Basque. Also, they furnished some of the ancestors of the Etruscans, right? The Etruscans, we got all this up, the Berbers, the Hittites, Punics of Syria, the so-called Egyptians, and the Pelasgi. Though long and carefully concealed, the reality of these events has been well understood by the savants, because in fact the Atlanteans had invaded northern Africa, where the present Mount Atlas is found, and the Mediterranean Herodotus placed the Atlantides, whose ancestors had survived in the Atlas Range in the present Barbary states, so explaining the mystery of the Gooms, Moors, and others, huh? The Goons, huh? The Gooms, the Moors, and others, huh? A lot of these people from the true old world, like I've been trying to say. Among the esotericists of the French Revolution was Fabre de Olivet, a master of Pythagorean philosophy who, having possessed himself of the key to the Hebraic hieroglyphics, eventually upon the demand of the church was exiled by Napoleon because of his disclosures. Bacon believed, as I do, he wrote, that America had been part of the ancient Atlantis. All right. Francis Bacon said that. We've read his book where he says America, as the ancients called it, right? Atlantis. So Francis Bacon and this guy Fabre de Olivet, he got exiled by Napoleon because he was telling the truth. He said, Bacon and I believe, and we know that America had been part of the ancient Atlantis. All right. Not all of it sank, is what I'm trying to been telling you guys. He makes it clearly understood in his Atlantida Nova. Definitely. New Atlantis, the book we read to you guys. And just real quick, I just want you guys to see this is real. This is the book right here. It's called The New Atlantis. So on page 2 of this book, we got right here how he says how the great Atlanteans or Atlantis, right, which we call America, how the great Atlantis, which we call America, abounded in tall ships, how the people of Peru through the South Sea and those of Mexico, the Atlantic Mediterranean, did both in 10 years' space make 2 great expeditions upon Ben Salam. So we were going over there. All right. This is what Plato was talking about. The Atlanteans invaded. Yeah, Americans. How the great Atlantis, which we call America, you see, is there in the book from 1660. This book was written, Francis Bacon. Now, going back, he makes it clearly understood in his Atlantida Nova that America is part of ancient Atlantis, right? Talking about Francis Bacon. Elsewhere, he says the frightful cataclysms that submerged Atlantis was caused by a sudden movement of the terrestrial globe, or maybe the plates, which suddenly raising the boreal pole, which had become lowered, caused it to take a contrary position to what it had formerly. In this movement, which perhaps had many oscillations, the mass of waters which had been upon this pole rolled with violence toward the austral pole, returned to the boreal pole, and back again many times toward the opposite pole, where it finally became fixed, overpowered with its weight. All right, so this is the author's kind of opinion what might have happened, the cataclysm or whatever. You know, he's thinking in space terms or globe terms. The earthwork gave way in many places, particularly where it covered caverns and deep and fractuosities, and in falling opened immense abysses where the waves rushed furiously, engulfing the debris which they had drawn after them, and the multitudes of victims whom they had deprived of life. The eastern hemisphere resisted longer, and was only watched, so to speak, by the waves which crossed over it without stopping. But the other was everywhere sunk and covered with stagnant waters, which remained there a long time. See, this whole cataclysm, the Great Flood, happened more in the Americas, guys, or it affected more of that ancient land that was connected to the Americas. They call it Atlantis and that ancient continents, right? All the astral lands where Atlantis properly so-called was disappeared. At the opposite pole, the Borean lands emerged from the depths of the water and became the cradle of the, listen to this, white or Borean race, see? You see how they always add themselves to this? You gotta dodge the hijack. This is the part that always kind of frustrates me because they add, oh, the ancient people were all white and the civilized people. All because of that happened. Now the white people came out. Where are they getting this from? All right, but let's continue reading, right? Once we issue says, thus it was to the disaster of Atlantis that we owe in a way our existence. That's kind of interesting. He's saying because Atlantis got destroyed, the ancient true old world America, now we came about, he's saying, the white. Even though all white people are not the same or have the same origin, this is what I'm saying. You can't group people by color, billions of people by just color. Not all the same. Either way, we pull out the babies, right, and we dodge the hijack. Let's continue to read and see what he says. It says, the black race, being born, as I have said, in the neighborhood of the equinoctial line, suffered much from this catastrophe, but infinitely less than the red or austral race, which perished almost entirely. Wow, the red, copper-colored race, huh? Only a few men whom a fortunate destiny found upon the Appalachian Mountains the Cordillera, or the Tapayas were able to escape from destruction. Huh. The Mexicans, Peruvians, and Brazilians had a special veneration for these mountains. All right, so remember all the stories of people coming out of underground or from mountains. Maybe it's because this stuff was going on and they found refuge in there. Things were happening. They had a vague memory that they had been a refuge for their ancestors. You see, these mountains and caves and stuff. It is said that still in our day, the savages of Florida make a pilgrimage 4 times a year to Mount Olympii, one of the highest of the Appalachians. You guys hear that? To offer a sacrifice to the sun in memory of this event. That's very interesting. And we know already that the Appalachian mountain chains, one of the oldest mountain chains in the world, connected to the oldest part of the world, the Laurentian Mountains going up to Quebec, Like, this is old land, guys. Appalachians used to be giant, used to be way higher. They've been eroded through time, you know? So this is interesting that people said they were able to, or their oral stories told them that they hid inside the Appalachian Mountains for a while, or took refuge there, just like many other parts of the world. Shout out to a lot of the Muskogee speaking people, Shout out to Rob, who told me about the legends of these people, coming out of Star Mountain in Mexico, underground. Huh. Here, the influence of the sudden lowering of temperature that ushered in the Great Ice Age concurrently with the beginning of the post-tertiary and caused the formation of the ice caps is entirely ignored. Yet from Genesis, it is quite clear that when the Greek frost god Boreas fixed his clutches upon the once burdened realm of Sealand, actual floods were attended by the southward swarming of those who left only the ancestors of the Eskimo and the remnants of Sealand. Although the elder, Edda, like the Bavarian Muspili, earth destruction, the Teutonic Helden sage, and the Finnish Kalevala, have long been ignored as mere fables. In the first, the Sibyl representing the historians of the Norse mysteries gives an accurate account of the 3 winters, implying the successive glacial periods of the Great Ice Age, showing in esoteric terms exactly what happened during these epochs to the peoples of Hell. Just how they survived the first winter, when those who remained in the old Hell all but starved is shown by the cave of Fingal, the legendary first king of Scotia, located on the island of Staffa on the west coast of Scotland, between the islands of Tiree and Mull. So it reminds me of a great book, I read once, Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock, how there was all these legends of a cataclysm, a flood, and also a great cold, and how ancestors, moved to the highest places in the earth, the mountains and stuff. Not everybody got on a boat, during these floods or whatever. But then that there was a sudden cold, and that animals will freeze, right? Even as they're eating, and that's why they have found animals scientifically. They have found in archaeology animals that look like they were in the act of eating. They're frozen like that, these ice age animals. Like all of a sudden cold just came about, So pretty crazy, right? So just something that came reminded me of that. Continuing, it says, today we know that the ice cap did not extend to the warm waters of the Lapteith and Kara seas. Kara, black seas. Kara means black, in which remained the Siemblas, serpent trees, nor to Scotia, or Erin, Scotia was included, Ireland, Scotland, Erin, and Novaya Scotia, or New Scotia, and Americas, right, which were protected by the warm Gulf Stream. Inland, it extended to the line of Maryland, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California. Wow. Inevitably, therefore, many of the people of North America would have moved southward, just as they did in Gallia and Asia. Wow, is that why they left the mound building area and went down? Thus, at some very remote time, the Renapi, descendants of the Algonquin Abnaki of Newfoundland, came to occupy the Atlantic seaboard from New England to the Neuse in North Carolina. Here they came up against the Muskogee, who included not only the Creeks, Choctaws, Chickasaws, and the Seminoles, whose ancestors had found refuge in southern Appalachia and Florida Keys, We may safely assume that this southward movement of the Algonquins was impelled by the climate long before they expanded westward from Newfoundland. Along the Rio Grande in Arizona and New Mexico, we find the artificial caves of the cliff dwellers, and also cave temples identical with the cave temples throughout Europe, just like in Europe, all right? Asia Minor, Siberia, Persia, Tibet, India, Burma, Malaysia, and Polynesia, showing where the ancestors of the Sunni during the Paleolithic and Megalithic ages found a refuge. Referring to Bacon, the Olivet wrote, he said that the inhabitants of this part of the world were once very powerful, and that they tried to subjugate the ancient continent. Huh. After the submersion of their empire, a few scattered men saved themselves upon the summits of the mountains. You guys hear that? These men, he adds, rapidly degenerated and forgot all the arts and became savages. They lived for a long time isolated and without laws, and were only united when the plains were uncovered and they were able to inhabit them. Boulanger, who has made great researches in this regard, thinks with just recent that after the loss of Atlantis, the people of this hemisphere who survived fell into a stupor and wandered for a long time without daring to found a settlement. He believes that the savage life was the result of the terror imprinted by this event and was the fruit of isolation and ignorance. Many of the savants have since expanded and commented upon these ideas, which are only a renewing of those Plato had received from the Egyptians, and which he admirably described in his book of Laws. The men said this philosopher who escaped from the universal desolation were for the most part herdsmen, inhabiting the mountains, deprived of education, where all the discoveries in art, politics, and sciences were unknown. They were lost, and not the slightest vestige remained of them. The most flourishing cities situated in the plains and on the borders of the sea had been carried away with their inhabitants. Everywhere was a picture of vast solitude. The immense country was without inhabitants. When two men encountered each other upon the gloomy ruins, they wept with emotion and with joy. Ha, wow. So after the cataclysm, right? It is not to be imagined that God's house, where Shalaz had marked out the true cross, with its intersection in America, listen, where now stands New Orleans, the true cross, at the mouth of the largest river in the world, had forgotten the red sinners of America. Nor is it possible to understand the post-Diluvian history of America without relating it to Genesis, okay? Upon leaving the ark, Noah and his sons erected an altar. According to Berosus, pieces of bitumen from the ark at Ararat were long cherished as amulets. Still in the time of Nicholas of Damascus, the tradition was extant that men had saved themselves from the ship that grounded at Mount Baris in Ararat, of which he declared the timbers were preserved a long while. The reference of Berosus to bitumen, implying timber pitched inside and out, indicates quite clearly the altar created by Shemites at Ararat was in fact a cross. Although for the reasons shown no mention is made in the Hebraic scriptures to the Western Hemisphere, except in the several references to the Golden Land of Havilah or Heliva in view of the geodetic true cross, common sense alone excludes the idea that post-Diluvian priesthood represented by Noah and his three sons would have ignored the smithing peoples of the Western Hemisphere. All right. So first of all, when the Bible is talking about Jerusalem, Egypt, they are talking about America. That's what this author doesn't understand, guys. We have true understanding. We have true context, guys. Don't get lost when we're reading all this, right? Of course they knew. So he's asking, how come they didn't know? Of course they knew. Who says they didn't? He's saying they didn't. But he's trying to let you know, this author, that it plays a true part in the ancient world and in biblical history, America. So of course Noah wouldn't forget where he was coming from. Remember, he built his ark with gopher wood that only grows in the Americas, gopher wood. Okay? Continuing, says, accordingly from Genesis, it appears that Following the biblical deluge, Shem, Ham, and Japheth overspread the whole earth. This, of course, must be taken to include Haliva, the hell of the Scandinavians and the Hindus. So Haliva became Helipa or hell. You see that? The underworld where the sun sets, the west where the cataclysm happened, the hell, huh? Haliva became Heliva, hell. The hell of the Scandinavians and Hindus, right? Contrary to the assumptions of many historians, it is not stated that the whole earth was repopulated from Babylonia. The implication is merely that just as the antediluvian Aryans, Dajdahaja Aryans means noble, remember, conveyed the serpent cult, the snake kings, snake, the Nagas, feather serpent, and the Latin monastics of a later age conveyed Christianity to every clime, so did the Noachian priesthood. Of this complete proof is found on the cephalic indices, nor is it stated in Genesis that the dispersal occurred immediately after the deluge. The vineyard Noah is said to have planted merely represented, of course, the human vines of the four races who had found a refuge in the mountains of Asia Minor or Asia Major. Josephus explained that so soon as the deluge was over, in obedience to the commands of God mentioned in Genesis, the three brotherhoods descended from the mountains to the plain of Sinaloa, Sinai, in northern Mesopotamia, and urged the others to follow their lead, so that agriculture and the arts and sciences might be reinstated. All right, so remember, when they're saying all these ancient places, don't think over there in that desert. They renamed those places. This, however, they were loath to do because they feared another deluge. Their fear was not alone of the waters, but also of the human deluge, during which the Mongoloids, with a propensity for scalping, had overrun the Indo-Europeans and Negroes of Asia and Gallia. That's the hijack. But either way, giving you some drop, because the Mongols, like, Genghis Khan and then so-called, I was a black man. He was a Negroid person. So you gotta dodge the hijack. But interesting, even though they add hijack, they're telling you the Negroids of Asia and Gallia, huh? The Negroids of Europe, huh? Yeah, but again, I told you, we gotta dodge the hijack a lot of time with the way they classify people, races and stuff in these. This is 1940s. This is already a lot of modern hijack added, a lot of opinion by the author. But the research is what interests us, what they try to say, what we can follow up on. Pull out the babies. It says, therefore they remained in the mountains and fell into the savagery, figuratively described as the inebriation of Noah, knowing the nakedness of the savages in the Sudan realms in the physical as well as in the spiritual sense, and that they had fallen into the hands of the black magicians or witchmen. The black magicians, huh? Who are these black magicians? Are they still running things? The Hamites called the attention of their fellow Aryans to the general situation. Therefore, the Shemitic and Japhetic priesthood spread out over their respective realms, and in that sense laid on their naked father the garment representing the tree cult. Accordingly, when Noah awoke from his stupor and saw that the Negroid Canaanites of Palestine had reverted to idolatry and the worship of the Bethels, he cursed the son of Ham. That's not really says in the Bible, but okay. But when he saw what Japheth had done to him, implying that the tree cult had been founded by the Mongoloid Aryans, there's a lot of hijack here, missing context and stuff and generalizations. But we're reading, guys, right? He blessed Shem, who had adopted it, and declared that Japheth should be enlarged and dwell in the tents of Shem. All right. Thanks for your interpretation, author. In other words, in his opinion, right, the Mongoloid and the Indo-European Aryans of Asia Minor were now leagued against the cult of idol ball enthroned by the Canaanites at the various antipodes of those who had rejected the philosophic arc of Noah. All right. Thanks for your interpretation. None of that is in the Bible. So we see that the struggle between Aryans or noble people and the hostile Ethiopians. What hostile? So Ethiopians, he's saying that he means black or Negroid people, or he doesn't mean people from a region. Or who does he mean? Because Ethiopian, back in ancient times, there was many so-called Ethiopians, and it wasn't even a landmass. All right? Who had rethroned the moon god Sin The moon got Thoth, sin, yep. The form of Baal, yep. Thoth, yep. I had already begun when at last the three brotherhoods persuaded their flocks to come down onto the plain of Shinar. Today we know the Euphrates, the fourth head, mentioned in Genesis 2, evolved in the region of the White Sea from a mixture of red Indo-European Negroids and Mongoloids who were bleached in that region to form the white race. You see? Now, hey, you guys, everybody's been asking me for years, where do white people come from, Kurimeo? Well, now you know. Here you go. No, sir, man. I'm literally joking, guys. Don't take me serious. Like, come on now. This is, you can't just generalize. Oh, you get this, you mix this, now you get the white race. Oh, okay. Oh, that's how simple it is. A little Indo-European, a little Negro, mix it here, a little Mongol. Oh, we got the white race. Okay, guys, take this with a grain of salt, but it's funny. He got that from Character of Racist Huntington. He's saying, that's what he says, right? Footnote 15. We'd have to go read that book ourselves and see what Huntington is saying, kind of. But if he's saying that, remember, that's 1925. That's not an ancient source. Where's he getting that from? Already, this had occurred when 848,000 BC, the eponymous Arphaxad, right? One of the sons of Shem, where Eber and Abraham come from, right? You see the X, the cross of St. Andrew's cross. Arphaxad was represented with that too, one of the emblems in the round table of King Arthur. So Arphaxad, one of the 5 groups, constituting the first generation of Shem, evolved in the region of the lower Euphrates, and there furnished the ancestors of the Chaldeans, the Irish. In this same generation, Elam, right? Elamites, these are all sons of Shem, right? Ashur, the Assyrians, Ludians, the Ludes. London is named after Lud, and Aram, where you get Aramaic, right? Aramaic, furnished the ancestors of the Elamites in Western Persia, the Assyrians, the Lydians, you see, and the Aramites, and the region of the lower Tigris, respectively. Contemporaneously with the evolution of the first generation of Shemites, evolved the 4 groups of Hamites. Of these, Cush represented the Negroes. So you see how they're trying to say none of the people from Shem are so-called black or Negroid, right? That's what they're trying to say. See how they're trying. That's why they said you got to dodge the hide. They're only making Hamites the so-called Negroids, who had found an asylum in the Parasharama range, which took its name from the 6th Hindu avatar, Rama, and his second aspect, where the Aryan ancestors of the Hindus had found an asylum. The noble ancestors, Rama, we're talking about Ramaya, the Maya Nagas, right? Aryan, okay. See how they're mixing everything up. Therefore, this range was also called the Hindu Kush. Another group of Negroids called Mizraim, another group of Negroids. It's a lot of Negroids all over the world, even in Shem, even in Japhet. Called Mizraim occupied the delta of the Nile. A third called Foot, the Barbary states, while the fourth, the Canaanites, occupied Palestine. Now, so this is his breakdown of races, right? But we're just reading, right? We're getting his interpretation, right? So the 7 Mongoloid groups, named as the sons of Japhet, logically occupied the northern zone, thus Magog, furnished the Scythians. This is what I'm saying. Scythians are the Saxons, also the Sakai. Not all of them are Japhet. This is what I'm trying to tell you guys. This has been a misinterpreted history when it associates Scythians with only Japhet or Mongols. Tubal or Tobel, the Iberis of Georgia, Madai, the Medes, Tiras, the Thracians, Javan, the Ionians, and Greeks who deemed Deucalion the progenitor, and Meshik, the Cappadocians. It was Gomer, however, whose domain extended from Amara, look at that, Amara, in the Taurus to the Atlantic, who furnished the Gauls, including the Galicians of Central Europe, the Ligurian Gauls of Italy and France, and the Galicians of Spain, and the Portuguese, who all took their name from Gallia. So that's a very big generalization. Not all the people labeled that were from Japhet, but or Gomer. But we do know that Ashkenaz was a son of Gomer, right? Ashkenaz. We know the Khazars and the Sumerians are related to Gomer. Thus, the various Indo-European Negroids and Mongoloids who had occupied Libya before the deluge were all brought into the Aryan fold. Okay. So his interpretation of race is okay. So knowing what that when Boreas seized the northern climes and the actual flood began, the Boreans streamed southward. We find two excellent guides to what happened in Britain. While Florence dealt with the peoples of Is or East as a reality, Galfredus pointed out that Gog Magog, whose name is preserved by the chalk hills south of Cambridge, Gog Magog in Cambridge, was a giant who, with his brother Corinius, once held the western part of England. You guys hear that? It was a real person. Here, reference was made by him to the Atlantean invaders of hell. Inevitably, these people were part of the human deluge. When Arphaxad, the white ancestor, appeared in the Euphrates, that was the hijack. You see, Shem, Arphaxad is the son of Shem, right? Shem comes from Noah, right? Noah eventually comes from Adam, right? Adam was born red man, right? That's what Adam literally means, copper colored, reddish brown, right? Copper colored. So where's the white? We know that Noah was a albino, so maybe, but who's to say that Shem or Ham or the other brothers of sons of Shem, either of them are light skin or dark skin, or like who has all this stuff, right? Is these authors making these people white because they want to include Shem or the Israelites as white only, because that's just the progenitor, so they have to try to make them white, right? It says when Arphaxad, the ancestor, appeared in the Euphrates, the white Tuahati, the Danan, the Danites are white too, huh? See, anybody related to Hebrew or Israelites, is these people making to pale skinned people. They try to glorify history by making all so-called white people, the ancient civilized people. So the Tuati, the Danan, or the tribe of Dan, the Danites, from going into Ireland, all these other different places of the world. We got so many good videos on the Danites, and whose name, as in Tubal, appears that of two. The Scythians had appeared in Ireland. So you see how they try to make the tribe of Dans into Japheth's people? See how this out there, how these people try to make them to Tubal, right? And the Danites are, they're not Japheth's people. And that the Scythians had appeared in Ireland. So Scythians, Saxons, Scythians, yeah. To these Scythians trace the names of Scalp Mountain and Scapa Flow. And again, sons of Isaac, not necessarily Japhet only. Naturally, the Magogs commingled in Assyria with Lud, the son of Shem. So he's saying a part of Japheth's people mixed with Lud's people, the son of Shem. Well, we can go with that. It's just the way he's trying to break it down with color and all that's what we don't agree with. But so he's saying that mixture who furnished the white Lydians, see, now he's making them white. Gosh. Who the ancestors of the Lydians were and where they came from is shown by philologists. Baffled by the name Lud, spelled Laud, by Josephus, a noted philologist concluded it must have been a misspelling. The mythical king Lud, right? This is Lud's son of Shem. So I tell you, that's where they get London from. So the mythical king Lud founded a Londonderry, the fort of Lud near Scalp Mountain, and the Giant's Causeway, and various forts in the region of East along the Upper Thames. He also built Lud's Fort on Lud's Hill, where on today stands St. Paul's Cathedral. Megalithic builders too, giant people, from which a road still leads to Lud's Gate, marking the basic meridian of Greenwich. In other words, it was the so-called white Scythians, or the Scythians, who overran the original dark Indo-Europeans. All right, we getting dropped with the hijack here, right? The original dark. I thought Indo-European meant white. I thought that meant Aryan. I thought that, no, the original dark Indo-Europeans of Britain, whose name is preserved in countless Rus and Rus along the west coast of Scotland, to whom the Gauls, monks, and the original peoples of Cornwall all trace back. The original people. See, so even though we get a little hijack here and there, guys, we get a good drop here and there too. Calling out the babies again. We talking about original peoples. We just talking about dark, melanated people, right? So he's saying these Scythians, they're trying to make them white. That's the hijack. This is more and more war. Undoubtedly, there occurred about 65,000 years ago another great submersion of Mesopotamia that ushered in the cycle of Shisustrus, because this was part and parcel of the esoteric deluge described in Genesis, which began in 850,000 BC. That's when he's saying it happened. And ended in 10,000 BC. It took that long to end, or the effects to clear up, right? Noah is described in Genesis as doing exactly what Shisustrus did. After sending out various birds to find dry land, he and his family sacrificed to the Lord at Mount Nisa in the Pamir, known to the Greeks as Rowandis, the mountain of the world. While it is impossible to say with certainty when the cromlechs of Britain and Northern Europe were erected, in Geodesy we find complete proof that Marianus and Nennius wrote only the truth. Thus, when Gregory of Monmouth, relying upon Nennius, wrote that the cromlechs of England were not built by the Celts, as thought by some, but traced back to a god older than Apollo, he pointed to Gog Magog and his brother Kurimeo, whose god was Python, the serpent of eternity. Serpent, huh? You know, it's probably related to the Americas, symbolized by these circles. Accordingly, in the ancient realm of Cornwall, over which Kurimeo ruled, we find that Piranu, as near as might be to the land's end, the great cromlech called the Piran Round, with a circumference of 100. The raised stage is surrounded by an embankment with seating capacity for thousands, forming a swastika at the exact latitude of Astrakhan, the star king of the Scythians. In the realm of the Corinthians or Circassia, its latitude axis extends from Astrakhan to Newfoundland, in which we have seen the name of Avalon or Iskalon still appears. The longitudinal axis, however, extends from the equator in the Congo, past the island of Monex, through Ballantrae in Scotland, the ruins of Galway, Greenock, the port of Glasgow, and northern Cape of Scotland. Then it passes close to Jan Mayen and the head of Greenland, in which, as in Greenwich, Greenock, the Emerald Isle, of an Innisfallen, and the Shamrock, the memory of the verdant realm of Is preserved. If, however, we should start in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco and follow northward the meridian, so 7 degrees west, we would pass through the port of Huelva, in the Gulf of Cadiz, Badajoz, in Castile, the mystical shrine of Alcantara, the eastern edge of Portugal, Waterford, the southern part of Erin, Tara, and Meath, the Giant's Causeway, 3 Island, past the island of Texas, and come at last to Lewis Island in the Hebrides, including the island of Texas. Here we find the great discussed swastika, forming the cromlech of Kaila Nishi, or Kailans Nishi, in which also is preserved the name of Is, marking the meridian of Frislanda, today called the Faroe Islands. Where the name of Hel appears, its horizontal axis points to the Norse Hellesund and the Swedish Göteborg on the Skagerrak, spirit of the German Ark, and to the island of Gotland in the Baltic and westward to Labrador. From this center of astronomical and geographical information, the stepping stones of the Orkneys, Shetland, and Faroe Islands would have made sailing to the Islanda, or Iceland, a simple matter even had the old land bridge of Hell been shattered to its present form. Therefore, just as the name of Japaheth appears at Papa in both the Orkneys and Shetlands, the trail of the Papa leads from Lida, Hell, and Frislanda to Reykjavik in Islanda. Manifestly, therefore, those who build the cromlechs, including the great discussed alignments forming crosses, such as those at Stonehenge and Avebury, the town of Avatar in Britain, and those in Belgium, Denmark, and Germany, which for ages were encased in ice and therefore preserved, were familiar with the old connection between Mayenne and Indra la Loire in France and the land of the Algonquin Cheyenne. There's all connection there. There's an old connection. Mayenne, Maya. all connection. With this picture of what was taking place in Britain in mind, it is easy to see what took place on the continent. While the three brothers were struggling to bring the children of Noah out of the mountains, the Danitics, who had occupied Danzig, Denmark, right, the mark of Dan, the Danites, right, and furnished the red-haired, the red-haired Twati the Dahanan of Ireland. So now they're all red-haired. Poured down into Asia, because we're talking about the Danes or Danites. They were described as black invaders, the Vikings. Yeah, that doesn't mean they couldn't have had black hair. They could have had red hair. I'm sorry. Yeah, red hair, man. They could have had red hair, even though they're so-called black. So I don't think it's just one color, but it's just these authors always try to make all these people so-called white, and then anybody associated to only ham are the Negroids, right? That's why we gotta dodge the hijack big time. That's why I'm gonna keep doing it while I read. And if anybody gets bothered by that, hey man, I gotta correct history. You gotta dodge all the hijacks. So continuing. So the Danites poured down into Asia Minor too, took possession of the three Olympii, and superseded Hermes, the messenger of Zeus. Hermes, huh? Thoth, the messenger of Zeus, huh? Corresponding to the Roman Mercury with Apollo, the consort of Athene. In short, Apollo was but the Postdiluvian counterpart of the Aryan Baal, who had been enshrined in Ireland, Britain, Scandinavia, the Baltic, and the Balkans. Zeus in his maturity and the Roman Jove were but the successors of Janus. The island of Euboea was but a part of the domain of the same name in Greece, from which it was separated when Samothrace was submerged, leaving Samothrax, Samos, Crete, Cyprus, Rhodes, the Dodecanese, and other islands. In the labyrinths of Samos and Lemnos, marking the latitudes of the two northern Olympii, just as in the labyrinths of Knossos in Crete and at Phoeuma, are found maps of the vanished Mediterranean. What has been shown enables us to avoid the pitfall which the inevitable Semitic turn of Genesis has constituted. For Western scholars, by concentrating their attention only on Ararat, instead of considering the abyss of learning, the Olympii, Denmark, Britain, and sweet Innisfallen, as well, despite the efforts of Josephus to prevent this, when the four races of which representatives had occupied Asia Minor began to expand, it was evident to the priesthood that a region so small as Mesopotamia would not support them all, and that soon or late interracial strife would begin. Therefore, says Josephus, the Mesopotamians were commanded to send forth colonies, not only for their own good, but to convey the cross to less favored peoples. All right. Again, these are all their interpretations, right? More concerned with their own momentary security than with charity for others, and to repeat aware of the scalping proclivities of the savages in Scythia and Gallia. So the Scythians were known to scalp people, just like Indians. The Scythians were known to have mounds, just like Indians. The Scythians were known to bury 7-footer, 8-footers in their mounds, just like the mound builders in America, who are the original Scythians, right? As I'm saying, it's not just Japhet. All right, we have a lot of context before reading this book. If you're new to my channel, if you think, why does he keep, disagreeing, I'm not disagreeing, I'm just telling you, we got to pull out the babies out of everything and dodge the hijacks. We got to be able to discern info, because we get a lot of hijack thrown in there between the truth. So, continuing again, these scalping proclivities of the Scythians, they refused to budge until they were made sensible by the inevitable penalty involved by their disobedience. What followed appears from Genesis 10 and 11. By this time, there were two centers of civilization in Asia. Of these, one was Karakorum, or Chara Chota, in the Gobi, constituting the capital of the great empire of the Turkic Uyghurs, erroneously said to have been the original Aryans, deriving their philosophy from the abyss of learning. Where is that? In fact, they were a great secret Aryan brotherhood, whose purpose is indicated by the trident of Poseidon, which these wondrous horsemen took as their symbol. So this abyss of learning, guys, they talking about the ancient world before it got, before whatever happened in America, right? In short, with this prod, they reestablished peace and law among the savages of Siberia, China, Japan, and Malaysia, and to them traces the Turanian civilization of the various Hunnish people, including the mixed so-called white, yellow, red Manchus, Mongols, and Turks of the Tartary. The second center was Lhasa, where the Aryans, represented by Rama in the aspect of Balarama, had enshrined the serpent cult during the antediluvian cycle of Noah. Now, in the aspect of Parashurama, the Aryan Caucasians who had succeeded the Jans or Swastika descended from the Himalaya and mixing with the red Rajputs and the Negro Tamils furnished the first Hindu, who changed the name to Sindhya to India. All right, so again, officially that place just got the name in 1947, guys, right after this book was written. So they didn't call it India over there ever. It was called Hindustan. That's while the Uyghur descendants of Tubal Cain were bringing Siberia, Manchuria, Korea, China, Japan, Siam, and Malaysia into the Aryan fold. The ill-famed moon god Sin became the Indra of the Hindus. So we gotta, again, Aryan to him over here means white, guys. So you gotta Aryan again means noble. Because in fact the geodetic true cross had been marked out upon the earth in the manner shown, and the hieratic language of Ru, thus the northern Atlantic continent that connected the Americas with Britain, had been conveyed to every clime before the deluge, notwithstanding the heterogeneity of language in the local sense. In Genesis 11:1, it is said that the whole earth was of one language and one speech, nor does Genesis fail to explain why the region of Mesopotamia is still shown on Turkish maps as the district of El Hasa, indicating exactly whence came the Aryan forebears of the Arabs. The Aryan forebears of the Arabs. Now remember, the pure Arabs are from Khatan or Joktan and his son Yoruba, right? Remember where the Yoruba people get their name from? Yoruba, from Yemen. So this is what I'm saying, guys. Have all the context we have before. Thus in Genesis 11:2, it is pointed out that the secret brotherhood of Hamites called Nabateans came to the plain of Shinar from the east. They were in fact the teachers from the Hindu Kush who introduced agriculture, as well as the arts and sciences accredited to the mythical Ea, the author of the first book said to have appeared in Chaldea out of the Erythraean Sea, Persia. What Persia? These arts and sciences, in parentheses, included the use of brick and mortar, with which the cities described in Genesis 10 were erected, and to the Magi, wise men, whose name traces back to Maya. Okay, Magi goes back to the Maya. Remember, we got in this before, this part. The Chaldeans owned their wisdom. Those the Chaldeans owned the Maya wisdom, Somehow the so-called Chaldeans, Ancient Ireland, Chaldean, Chaldean, Chaldee, Kati. The ancient Maya, gave them all their wisdom. Chaldeans, Irish, Although Nippur, the oldest city in Mesopotamia, traces back to the Akkadians, who had founded Susa, and Urlan, in the delta of the Euphrates, to the Nabateans, the cities of Eridu, and Erechi, the seat of Ishtar, the daughter of Sin, who found his seat at Ur, all their origin. Eridu, Erin, Arlan. Human nature, however, has not altered. Despite the Hamitic Nabateans and the Ethiopian allies of the Canaanites meant to rule the world. Therefore, along with his Aryan progeny, Cush begat Nimrod, Bel, representing the mythical King Belus of Egypt, the son of Hera, who also had set up Baal. Thereupon the Ethiopians set out to conquer Asia Minor, although the Assyrians migrated northward and founded Nineveh, at the latitude of the trinity of Karakorum and Rhodes. The Chaldeans who had founded Borsippa were subjected. Thereupon they founded Babylon. Eventually the Assyrians also were subjected, and like the Chaldeans fell victim to the black magicians. Anu became Nebo, the son of Ea, whose name appears in Mount Ea near Jerusalem. Although Ishtar had been enthroned at Erech as the daughter of Sin in his higher aspect, Ea now took his place as the god of the ocean and wisdom in the upper triad of the Assyrians with Bel and his wife Baalit. Thus both the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians had been utterly perverted by the Ethiopians when, in defiance of the Aryans, the irresistible Nimrod set out in this period of utter philosophic confusion to build the mythical Tower of Babel, representing the overtowering civilization which had arisen on the false foundations of conflicting religions. To this cycle, in all probability, traces Belfast, the fort of Bel in Ireland. You see? That's all right there, talking about all these other places with the true Tower of Babel. What was that? That possibly in North America. Shout out to UBTB. But again, throwing out a lot of tags. Oh, the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, the Arabs, the Ethiopians. But leaving out a lot of context, Continuing. In vain, Eber, the son of Arphaxad. So Eber's like his grandson or great grandson, not his direct he's not the next in line, but it is of his line. So Eber is from Arphaxad's line, representing the unperverted Chaldeans. So remember, the Arphaxites were the actual Chaldeans and how that connects to Ireland and all that. We got the whole video, right? Protested, and as the colonizer of Hebraism, based on the philosophic synthesis called Javeh, that's not Hawa, representing the septenary principle of the old serpent cult, symbolized by the triangle and square. Combined, they form the sacred hebdomad, corresponding to the human Hebdad, designated in the Kabbalah as Adam Kadmon, the mortal serpent. Larger and even more powerful had grown the empire of Nimrod, when, as shown by Josephus and others, a great storm occurred during which the whole structure of Nimrod fell to the ground. In truth, the storm was the beginning of the first glacial period that brought to an end the first winter of the elder Edda. Now, with the seasonal melting of the glaciers and the resulting floods, Mesopotamia was no longer habitable. Again, the would-be conquerors of the earth had been defeated by nature. Therefore, in 800,000 BC, began the migrations described by Josephus, during which colonies were planted overseas. All right, so where they get in their numbers and all that, this is their interpretations of history, right? We don't know. It could be 800 BC. Or is he talking about the days of Peleg, when everything was separated? At this time, in all probability, Britain was separated from Brittany, and the old land bridge of hell broken up more completely, so the connection to the Americas. Thus, in Genesis 10, it was in the cycle of Eber's son, Peleg, and Joktan, that the earth was divided in the days of Peleg, like it says in the Bible, plainly implying the coming into being of the old and the new worlds by a complete separation. Furthermore, it appears from Genesis that one group of Hebrews, represented by Joktan, migrated eastward, occupying among others the Naga realms of Havila in India and Ophir and Sumatra, where Mount Ophir marks the equator. So yeah, Joktan's people eventually went also to Yemen, right? Where they mixed with some of the, I believe, Hamites that were there, like it's saying here, and became as the pure known, the Yoruba and all these people, the pure Arabs. So remember, Joktan's coming out of Shem, though, so that different mixture is what creates a whole different people. To this division traces the myth that Belus, the mythical king of Egypt, right? The Tower of Belus is the pyramid of Cholula. That's the real ancient Tower of Belus. Gave Arabia, the mythical king of Egypt, gave Arabia, Yemen, and Egypt to his twin sons Danaus and Aegyptus, respectively. The Danites, Aegyptus, This was fully explained by Plato in the Critias, from which it appears that in 800,000 BC, the laws of Athene were transmitted to the Egyptians, who now set up the unbegotten and self-perpetuating mother goddess Neith, the counterpart of Athene, as Sais, the oldest city in the delta, at the exact latitude of Jerusalem, the delta of the Euphrates, and the region of Aram, wherein Isa appears. Isa. So, a lot to break down, a lot of context when we're talking about Danius, and Aegitus, his brother. We're talking about Joseph, because Danite is Danine. So, a lot to know. But still, we're pulling the babies. We're getting a little bit of the drop in his perspective here with his sources that he's interpreting. It says, when Britain was torn apart from Brittany, so that's a good drop, like that Britain was part of Brittany. They were connected, the British Isles with mainland Europe. Those are all connected at one point too. So when Britain was torn apart from Brittany during the Pleistocene, the men of the Old Stone Age, whose remains were buried in the gravels of East Anglia and Kent, vanished from England, although the continuity of the Tuatha De Danann, who had succeeded the dark man of Ruta and Erin, remained unbroken. The dark man, huh? The original people. But the Danites, who's to say they weren't also melanated? We conclude, therefore, that the Scythians of England either found a refuge in Ireland or mingled with the cavemen of the Low Country to form the Cymrics. So he's conjecturing right there a little bit. The Cymrics are the Cimmerians too, coming from the Cimmerians. On the other hand, it may well be that the progeny of Coreneos furnished the Corinthians. So again, like you're saying, it may well. So he's again concluding, guys. Inevitably, just as Mesopotamia would have been periodically submerged during the second glacial period, much of Gallia would have experienced the same lot. Therefore, the utmost confusion would have reigned there. As shown in Genesis 10, logically to the Mongoloid progeny of Japhet, the task was assigned at dividing the Isles of the Gentiles. All right, the Isles of the Gentiles. It wasn't Shem's people. Gentes of the Isles, Gentiles. And to assigning to the various kindred, families, and natives the domains they were to occupy, so as to stabilize and pacify them as the first essentials of their education, spiritual and otherwise. Accordingly, in countless place names in Europe, such as Chiusi in Italy, where a labyrinth appears, and Chichester in England, we find the Chi indicating the site of Christos or sacred tree. The division of the Isles into domains also suggests the survey pursuant to which it is evident many of the great cities of Europe owe their sites. This, however, brings us to face with one of the most profound mysteries in history. Although according to Josephus it was the Ionian Elysians named in Genesis as Elisha, the son of Javan, who founded the Postdiluvian civilization of Sicily, and the Aeolians of Tyrrhenia, according to Herodotus, the Etruscan trace to the Lydian descendants of Lud. All right, they're from Shem. The Etruscans are from Shem, the son of Shem. They come from Lud. You guys hear that? Herodotus, however, was an initiate of the Kabita. Kabita, as explained by him. When he came to discuss the zodiac at Sais, the labyrinth at Fayuma, and the pyramids of Giza, he could only say little. Yet the name of the Etruska, the 7 hills of Latium, upon which they enthroned Janus before there were any Romans, the Borean origin of Janus, and Geodesy together give us the key to the implications of the Italic god. The white Phoenicians, so-called white. So see, he's making Phoenicians white, the Hebrews white, the Atlantis, everybody white. Phoenicians meant seafarers, whatever color. Seafarers. So the Phoenicians who had taken over the Pythian mysteries had not failed to see in Mount Blanc, the young Frau, just as modern scientists have done, a natural symbol in the relation between Switzerland where the swastika has been found, just like in America, right? Not just there, to the Himalaya, Hindu Kush and Kuen-Lun ranges constituting the Alps of Asia. Nor had they failed to note the wonders disclosed by Mother Earth, and the correspondences between the celestial and terrestrial phenomena in which every truly great scientist has found the proof of a divine wisdom. Therefore, on any old graph of Gea displaying the early colorations appears a human form with arms outspread. Of this figure the head is formed by Dan Mark, owing its name like the Huatidanans, like the tribe of Dans, Dan Mark, yep, who had succeeded the Dark Rutans of Erin. The Dark Rutans, which he was calling the people of the North Atlantic continent, which was North America and all the way to the British Isles. The Dark Rutans of Erin, old Erin. This is what I'm trying to tell you guys. Erin, to the ancestors of the Ionians represented by Dodan-im, the grandson of Japheth or Japhet, and the son of Javan. The torso is formed by Germania, including Switzerland, Sweden, and Austria, with Cisalpine Gaul at the hips. Formed by Etruria, the leg finds the toe and heel of its boots in Calabria and Upalia, with the former pointed to Sicily, marking the Tyrrhenian gateway to Gallia from Utica. One arm formed by the Netherlands reaches out towards Britain, the other formed by East Prussia towards Russia, as if to guard both the North Sea and the Baltic. Such in truth was the Danitic symbol of the white man's purpose to dominate Gallia, the white man's purpose. You know, guys, that's the highlight, you see? The supremacy this guy puts on in history, like these authors, a lot of them do. It was not accident, therefore, that Japhets, representing Euphrates, the flower of Europe, all right, the flower of Europe, Euphrates and Europe, cited the original four-way arch or temple on the meridian passing from Mount Albans through Japaenhagen in Denmark and on through Norway to Dans Island in the Spitsbergen group where Janus had come. No more was it accident that the cult of Cerberus was enthroned at Sinope, at the highest point of Asia Minor, marking the meridian of Mount Carmel and Mount Sinai, at the latitude of Mount Albano. This is but additional proof Janus had been enthroned in Janina and Latium before the Black Sea came into being. With the geographical figure of Baldur, the Norse Atma, before us, Scandinavian mythology, and the whole history of Nietzsche's blonde beast becomes as clear as day. The whole of Postdiluvian prehistory becomes the epic of the struggle during which Euphrates undertook to recover the control of the earth, which first the Atlantean Sudines and then the mythical Nimrod had asserted, with Rome as the pivotal point. Knowing what was in the mind of the Etruska, when we come to examine the new world to which the Piran round the cross of Kalanish, right, the cross, like we've been learning, the monks' crosses and the cross of Kong all the crosses point to America, we find that God's house was not concerned with material empire. Historically revolutionary, the charts included in this work disposed forever of the idea recently repeated that the ancients did not know the earth was round. That's the hijack. Also, they fully explain why Mediterranean, Caspian, Ural, and Alpine, as well as Pale Alpine, Pale Negroid here, Australoid, and Mongoloid skulls have been found in the mounds of ancient America. Wow, you see, this is a great example of how he breaks down races, right? So now you got Mediterranean features, Caspian, so-called Caspian features, or people he's describing, right? You got all these phenotypes, people that look Mediterranean, Caspian, Ural, Alpine, Pale Alpine, even Pale Negroids. What is he? He's determining by the skull, right? Australoids, like literally black folks from Southeast Asia, right? Mongoloid skulls have been found in the mounds of ancient America. So all these different phenotypes. Negroid included, Australoid, just like the ones that look like from Papua New Guinea. Yeah, Australoid, right? that look like LeBron James. So, look how he broke it down. That's why I said Dr. Hijack, where he sees things. But you get the idea now. He just didn't want to say Negroid, but he put pale Negroid. That's silly. Either way, all this being found in the mounds of ancient America, right? From then it appears that a straight line on a mnemonic projection passes from Cape Farewell in Greenland through Mount Washington, the highest peak in the ancient realm of Massachusetts, Mount Mitchell, or Layami, the highest peak in the Appalachia, the delta of the Mississippi, Xochicalco, the Calco, and thence on the realm of Otaheite in the South Pacific, where the two-headed peak Orajena is marked by the pyramids of Atahura. Another line passes from Wrangell's Island in the Laptev Sea through Bering Strait, Mount Whitney near the Golden Gate, Texuana at the head of the Gulf of California, or the Red Sea, right? Xochicalco, the Inca capital of Cusco in Peru, the House of Ru, Peru, or the House of Ru, La Paz, the capital of Bolivia, Asunción, the capital of Paraguay, and on to Porto Alegre, on the coast of Brazil in the region of Rio del Sol. Thus, Xochicalco at the antipodes of Amaracantaka, Amaracapana, remember? Amaracantaka marks the intersection of a great geodetic chi, or chi, in Patala or Hell, the Chi people, and the antipodal meridian of Lake Manasorowar and Adams Peak. Although it is useless to dogmatize with respect to the time the survey was made of which the American Chi is the product, this is indicated by several things. In Genesis 10, it is pointed out that the isles of the Gentiles were divided before the end of the fifth Japhetic generation of Noah. Second, Josephus states that colonists were sent overseas following the collapse of Nimrod's empire in 800,000 BC. Third, it was specifically declared by a Spanish historian in the oldest chronology of America that the biblical Naptuhim, the Egyptian offspring of the Hamitic Mizraim, came to Mexico during the confusion of tongues. Oh yeah? Oh, we got Mizraim and Hamitic in Mexico. All right, where's the sources for that? He says 59. So 59, let's see. It says Chronology, Carlos de Sigüenza y Góngora from 1656. Then it says Narrative and Critical History of America, Windsor. So we're going to have to look into that. What are you talking about? What is he interpreting? Interesting. Either way, this is ancient Egypt. So yeah, and ancient Mexico, during the confusion of tongues after that happened. In this work, the writer undertook to show at great length why Josephus did not mention Atlantis in terms, pointing out that Naptuhim was none other than the Greek Poseidon. Okay, yeah, we're talking about the Americas and the Roman Neptune. The people represented by Naptuhim, he declared, arrived in Anahuac, Anahuacan, Ananaki, Anahuacan, by way of the Asaurian remnants of Atlantis. In complete accord with the Hindu conception of Lake Mansorowa as the birthplace of the fully sexed man, stands that Xochicalco, an extraordinary symbol. Consisting of an immense cone with an egg-shaped base of 3 miles, it rises to a height of 400 feet by a spiral roadway forming 5 terraces corresponding to the 5 root races. Eventually, on the summit was erected a circular temple of which the frieze constitutes a moonstone, displaying the flowering of the successive root races. Therefore, it seems evident the cone owes its name to the fact that it was a symbolic castle affording its occupants security in a barbaric sea. On the other hand, its pentagonal symbolism comports with Genesis 10:5. Like Sigüenza, the great theological scholar William Penn was, of course, thoroughly familiar with the works of Josephus, which were translated by his contemporary Winston, who, because of his so-called Arianism, was dismissed from the faculty of Cambridge after putting forth his theory of the world in conflict with Christian dogma. After his return from the wilderness of Ohio, whither he had been taken by the famous Delaware Sakim Tamenend, that's what they named the Tamenend Society, right? Remember? Eventually the Sons of Liberty and all that's involved with, right? Who threw the tea over, the Boston Tea Party, you guys remember? They took his name. So he gets kidnapped by this guy, huh? The famous Delaware Sakim Tamenend, who was supposed to be a frequent visitor to Mexico. All right, that guy went to Mexico all the way from Delaware. Did you guys know that? And to the Inca of Peru. He traveled all the way to the Inca. Can you imagine how long that would take him? He probably navigated, I bet you. The great proprietor declared he had found much there indicating a very ancient connection between the Indians and the peoples of the Old Testament. All right, the Old Testament. The memoirs of William Penn, huh? Had Tamenend pointed out to him the symbolic mounds marking the vertical arm of the true cross? Be this as it may, soon he was involved in charges of treason. Also familiar with Genesis and the work of Josephus, the French scholar D'Olivet, in referring to the Native Americans, said, when the Spaniards encountered them, they were still in the infancy of the social state. None of their faculties was wholly developed. That's the hijack. They were weak physically as well as morally. It could be distinctly seen that they belonged to a race different from the white and black. They belonged to the red race, but were not pure. So that's the hijack. You guys see? This guy was hating back then. They were the result of a primal mixture of a very remote epoch, when the white race did not yet exist. Did he really say that, guys? Like, where's the source for this? Hold up. Here we refer to the red, black, brown. Here he referred to the red, black, brown blood. Red, black, brown. Red, black, brown. Contributed by the original red race. So the original red race, listen to the drop. The original red race meant red, black, brown, actually. Red, black, brown. Original red race, the Negroes of Brazil, and the Mongoloid ancestors of the Eskimo, to whom a very great contribution to the American Indians has ever been ascribed. All right, so where they getting? Oh, from pre-Adamites, from Winchell, the races of man. Okay, I see where he's getting the hijack from. It's funny, the interesting how these people, right, think. Remember, we're in the mind of a hijack. We got to pull out the babies and dodge the hijacks. The year these words were written by the man who had found the key to the Hebraic hieroglyphics and dealt at length with the philosophy of Pythagoras, Alexander Humboldt published his revolutionary disclosures. 2 years later, Bodinot published a debate over the Jewish theory of American origins. Just 13 years later, Joseph Smith published the Book of Mormon, said by him to have been based upon tablets buried in the Iroquois country of northern New York, to which he was directed by an angel in a dream. On them, he claimed, was inscribed the record of a migration to America of the Jaredites from Babylonia during the confusion of tongues. All right, so these tablets, these golden tablets, they say it was Mi'kmaq, written in Mi'kmaq language. Mi'kmaq represented, like, it looked like this old ancient Hebrew Egyptian script, right? But that's Mi'kmaq. This is the old world, the guys. And true or not, those tablets were probably already there. He knew about it. Somebody told him. He says an angel, but his name was Moroni. All right, so he found these golden tablets in a cave in New York, right? That's where he created his religion from. Yep. It is possible, of course, for the skeptical to ascribe the statements of Smith to a knowledge on his part of the works cited. Whatever the fact may be, almost concurrently with the Book of Mormon, King began to publish his discoveries. Although lacking a sound chronology and misled by Father Duran and others, King vainly undertook to prove the Jewish origin of the Indians. All right, you guys hear that? There's many people who were writing about this. We've literally read from the books. With the evidence presented in the 15 great volumes published by him and the Geodetic True Cross and the Geodetic X before us, it is easy to understand the confusion of old writers. Since the Aryan chi and the X appear in every clime, invariably, despite varying dialects, denoting a sower of seed. Whether spiritual or otherwise, it is easy to trace the countless chichens and chelas because of the countless terraces in the Andes whereon the chelas taught the natives to raise their crops. Peru is known to archaeologists as the Western Tibet. The original? On them was cultivated the maize peculiar to America, ever ascribed to the Mayas. Also, it is evident that the geodetic true cross and the geodetic X together fix the site of every city of importance in the New World. All right, listen to what they're telling you here. This is esoteric, a little bit confusing, but there's deep knowledge here. Something, the symbology and where these places are built and how. We're talking about the true cross. We've been reading a lot about this so-called true cross. We just did a video the other day, right? Reviewed the information on the origin of the name of America, which aligns with what they're talking about right now. Land of the true cross, land of the plum serpent. In view of the two charts, there would seem to be but one conclusion. The Aryans of both Gallia and Asia, cooperating under the direction of the abyss of learning in the Gobi, had already extended the charity of God's house to the smithing Australoid race, as well as to the peoples of Europe and Asia, before the Paleolithic age came to an end with the Noachian cycle in 500,000 BC. So how do they know there wasn't a so-called Australoid race in Europe before their people he's calling European and Asian, right? When the Sakinu or Sakimu tell us that the deluge was caused by the blood of wounded red giant, let us not laugh our sleeves with Fraser and other modern scholars at Poor Low, who saw God's face in every cloud and heard his voice in every wind, noting how much knowledge Louis Morgan, adoptee of the Seneca, contributed to mankind. The thoughtful will not fail to wonder just how much he learned from Poor Low. Surely the American people can only find inspiration in the fact the land of the Great Spirit had come to symbolize by the geodetic X. The land of the Great Spirit is the cross, the figure of the Christos, which the Etruska had seen marked out in other parts of Ruta. In North America, they had seen the symbol, the inscription. All right, you got the drop. All right, so that's the end of this chapter, guys. We're gonna end it right here today. All right, just trying to get through the book, see what we can pull out. Again, this is the first time I read this chapter. We read it together for the first time. So, pull out the babies, get what you can from it. There was, a lot of good drop in it, a lot of hijack, but we know how to discern the info, right? Again, this was the book, America, the background of Columbus, being a survey of the revelations of science with respect to the Western Hemisphere and its peoples before its unveiling by Columbus, so-called Columbus, by Jennings C. Wise, all right? Virginia Academy of Science, American Association for the Advancement of Science, right? A member of that back then in the 40s. All right, hope you guys enjoyed the reading and what we can get out of this book. We got more and more videos coming. And again, America, the true old world, as you guys can see how it's connected in all these stories. And when you start doing real research in the ancient world, you see its connection truly. And its connections to so-called Atlantis. All right. Thank you for tuning in, guys. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.